Hello, how are you? Great to see you at Roll Call. I'm not going to mention any names on this video because for a very short period of time, I'll be uploading it as an unlisted YouTube video. No one's ever going to find it. It's unlisted. I'm not going to put in any keywords, and I'm going to take it down from YouTube after August 2. But there will be nothing identifying about students here at any rate. So assessment task readiness means that you can see the path that you need to follow in order to complete your assessment task for 10 elective history by August 2. You've selected your question, you have a good basic understanding of what the question is requiring you to do, and all that means is topics that you need to find out about. A deep understanding will develop as you complete the task, that you know where the relevant teacher-provided resources are, because I have provided many resources, and that you know how to get alternative sources. For example, you can use advanced Google search or look up Google Books. Okay. Linked to this particular sheet or page, we've got questions and answers. So students have asked me questions and I have provided the answers here. There's also a survey form, and I note that you've filled that out, but you just need to give a little bit more information. Now, let's have a look here. This is the question and answers sheet. So first question, do you do better if you cover both the Cold War and African American civil rights in your task? Not necessarily. Someone could cover both those topics in a great deal of depth. That is, they could look at how JFK handled the Cold War crises involving the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Berlin Wall crisis in their respective years. They could also look at JFK's handling of civil rights activism, but there may not be a lot of detail there with the person that has covered both these issues. Someone might select just the Cold War and do a really in-depth, sophisticated job, or not. It really depends on what you do with the information that you provide and that has been provided for you on those slides. So read through this. Do you achieve better if you write more? Not necessarily. Read the answer to that, and so on. I don't think I need to go through all of these and read them aloud, but just note that they are linked to that particular Compass page. Now that was taking us through to the form. I'm not going to do that in case, actually what I will do, I'll just stop the video for a tick and then I will restart it. I'll make sure that no email addresses are showing. No, I'm unable to go into the survey form because I'm unable to move the email address away from the screen. That's okay. So what you need to do is fill in the survey form again and make it clear whether you are focusing on you did select the option, but also let me know whether you are focusing on the Cold War or JFK's engagement with civil rights activism, or both of those topics. You've got choice. Okay, here's the assessment task. Due August 2. Oh, so the length, 500 words, fine. 750 words, fine. But no penalties for a longer response. You need a research grid, but you don't need to footnote, okay? Here are the options. So there's option 1, and there's option 2. So option 1, the conversation involving historians. Make sure that you convey a sense of contestability. this idea that there are different perspectives. But that doesn't mean that the historians have to disagree about everything. Okay, for example, with civil rights activism, Kennedy was involved. He did further the cause of African American civil rights to an extent, but historians have different perspectives on that. We will click through to the slides soon and talk about that further. Okay, note that for the scripts between individuals, remember that one of the individual needs to have been alive at the time that JFK was alive, but the other individual involved in the conversation can be an historian, and it doesn't even matter if they're alive at the time, or it can be a person that you invent, or even yourself. Here are some starter sheets. By that I mean, I've got some resources embedded and some tips. Okay, sample response. These various resources have been linked. Let's go to the slides. Now these slides are full of resources. Okay, so it starts off with the Cold War. Some resources are linked here. More of an overview, and we've got some teacher summary sheets. The ones with the asterisk next to them particularly useful. So Hybel on the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he poses one argument and he basically presents Kennedy as someone who was foolhardy and he nearly brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. In other words, disaster. Whereas Ryan Holiday argues that he handled the situation brilliantly. So I leave it to you to read the article, but I think you selected the civil rights. Okay, JFK Civil Rights Crusader. These resources focus on JFK as a civil rights advocate. So they're selective. They basically, these support notes use these resources to list what he did. Let me just open them up to show you. So those resources were used for an activity in which you made notes relevant to the argument that JFK did support civil rights for African American people. And there are some useful dot points, so have a look at those if relevant to your focus. Okay, the overview video. And we've got some useful resources here. Now those resources were linked to an activity on Compass. So go back and have a look at previous things that we've done on Compass. For example, there is a resource there where students answered this question in relation to at least two of these sources, and I provided the topic sentence for a paragraph. So look at all, not just today, not just this week's Compass lessons, but earlier lessons that have been posted. Relevant to Kennedy, the notion of whether he was particularly useful for civil rights activism, and just going back Reeves argues that he was extremely cautious and he was much more of a Cold War warrior and focused on his political success. But again, something that can be read by you. All the resources, some very valuable resources are here. Okay, asterisk, this is a useful one. So Derek Katzum argues that JFK was slow to act on civil rights because of the political consequences. And this is illustrated by his failure to support the Freedom Rides or Freedom Riders in 1961. Indeed, he betrayed them. Take a look at page 542. Look at the whole article, but that is certainly taking you to a relevant section of it. However, viewed very differently, Mark Stern argues that Kennedy was right to be cautious on civil rights because if he pushed too hard, his administration, which depended on the support of Southern members of Congress, would soon come to an end. And he argues that eventually many African American activists came to understand the need for caution. So it's a different perspective. Now, regardless of whether you are doing the script involving historians or the script between an individual alive at the time that JFK was alive and one other person who could actually be an historian, and I'm not bothered about whether the historian was alive when JFK was alive. Regardless of what option you are doing, remember that one of the main things you are conveying, something that is very central to the task, is this idea of different perspectives, that we've got different historians can look at the same material and select information to emphasize or not to focus so much on other aspects of the information. So they have different perspectives, in other words. But I don't want you to think that they have to be so different that they disagree about everything. No, not at all. In fact, if we have a look at the questions and answers, is it necessary to have my historians in absolute disagreement with one another? No, it is definitely not. And few historians are in absolute disagreement. You certainly don't want to be using historians in a way which distorts what they actually think. For example, no historian would be arguing that JFK did absolutely nothing to assist the civil rights movement. That would be a distortion of history. But there would be disagreement about the degree of his genuine commitment to the civil rights movement. There would also be disagreement about his strategy in relation to civil rights. Did he delay action because he was more interested in his political career than human rights? Or was this smart strategy so he could get elected into a second term and then achieve much more for civil rights than he could in the first term? So there are different ways of looking at these scenarios. So again, I'm only not saying your name because of the fact that I will be uploading briefly this video to YouTube. I hope that everything goes well. Stay in touch. Email any questions. Bye for now.